Lawyers of Reddit, what is the most morally challenging case that you've worked on? Did a bail hearing back in my second year of practice as duty counsel. Think public defender type role. The guy had trapped his girlfriend in the cab of his pickup, twisted one arm up behind her back to her shoulder and broke it, then did the other side. I had to run the bail hearing for him, while she and her family were sitting in the front row of the court. She had both arms in casts and in slings. Thankfully, his surety, the person posting his bail, melted down on the stand and we had to adjourn. By the time he was up for bail again, he'd retained private counsel, who put the same surety up on the stand even after I warned him not to, in front of the same justice. Upside, he got detained. Not me, but my brother is a criminal defense attorney. He worked as a contracted public defender for a few years after starting his own business to get some guaranteed income while building his client base. The catch with these contracts is you're not able to refuse clients. He had to defend a guy that had repeatedly violated his toddler daughter while the mom watched. When I asked him about how he got through it, he said, "When I get to a point where the crime is so heinous that I can't empathize with my client, I switch my frame of thought from how will I get this guy reduced or no time to how can I ensure this guy won't have a chance at a mistrial." So essentially, he copes by making sure that everyone from the police, to the jailers, to the prosecution team are 100% on the up and up so that when this guy gets found to be guilty, there's no way he'll get set free on a technicality. That's actually pretty smart. During my days of insurance defense, I spent one lovely afternoon bickering with counsel for a co-defendant over who would be responsible for paying the $5,000 that was keeping us from settling. We did this while on site at the plaintiff's home for a deposition. Plaintiff was hit by a semi-truck. That is, the truck hit his actual body on the interstate, and while it managed not to kill him, it tore off an arm and a leg, and shattered most of everything else. He was almost entirely immobile, confined to a power chair that he could barely operate, and confided to us that if he had function in his remaining hand, he'd shoot himself. Oh, the $5,000? It was based on an estimate to renovate his bathroom so that he could actually use it. He'd been peeing crapping in a bedpan in the living room. I felt like a complete frick sitting in front of him and arguing about such an insignificant sum. Yet man, you got to have some pretty thick skin or be a total sociopath to work for the insurance companies. I don't blame you since you're just trying to get paid, but I feel like it would get pretty dark screwing people over for a living. Family law attorney here. I've done plenty of divorces and custody dispute cases. That most stuff doesn't get to me. It's only when the kids are put in a bad situations between one or both of the parents being some type of addicts that really gets to me. One that was especially hard for me was a divorce where I represented dad. Mom was a raging alcoholic that would bring random guys home many nights from the bar while the dad was working. I saw video and heard phone calls from their little boy calling the dad at work at like 2 AM because he was tired, but couldn't go to sleep because mom was playing loud music and had friends over still partying. I was on the right side of that one, but seeing and hearing that stuff with the little boy really got to me. Not my case, but at a previous firm, a partner sent out a firm-wide email congratulating his team on a great win. It detailed how their win meant that our client, giant fossil fuel company, wasn't liable for damage to the environment caused by leaks in their pipes. Instead, the taxpayers would be covering the cost. The partner went on to say something to the effect of this saves our client $X billion a year in environmental cleanup and pipe maintenance. For some reason, even though it wasn't my case, that one has always stuck with me. At the end of the email, on an unrelated note, please continue to boil your drinking water due to pollution concerns. Had a case where a guy shot and killed a security guard that slapped him across the face for selling drugs near a store. I knew the guy had done it. It was close to midnight. The crime scene had poor lighting and the shooter wore a hoodie. Only eyewitness that showed up for the trial had told the police at the time of the crime that the suspect was black. The defendant wasn't Caucasian but wasn't black either. That, emo, was the argument that won the jury over. Defendant found not guilty. He thanks me while in tears. His mother and grandmother bring me cake and a thank you note afterwards. Less than a year later, I'm watching the news and they're reporting a crime where a crew held up 3 families hostage while robbing their apartments. They beat up the janitor very bad. They tied the families up and locked them in one of the apartment's bathroom while threatening to throw a grenade inside if any of them decided to wisen up. For a brief second one of the robbers looks right into an elevator camera before spray painting it. Close up on the guy's face. I think you can imagine whose face I was looking at. Lawyer here. I once had to defend a guy that killed his own grandmother and rubbed his own fecal matter all over the corpse. It was bad. That generally renders the corpse inedible. My friend's dad is an attorney. He started out in criminal defense and lucked out on one of his first cases. A friend he'd known for years' wife was horribly murdered while he was away, dismembered with an axe. Her body had been found by a fluke, and there was a tiny bit of circumstantial evidence pointing to the husband. He was an upstanding citizen. The two had never fought. It was a silly case. The lawyer got the husband acquitted, and while they were having celebratory drinks, the husband admitted he'd actually done it. My friend's dad walked out of the bar and switched to corporate law. What a psychopath, goddamn. I represented a mom in a custody case. Both parents fighting for primary. Mom was admittedly a mess and suffering from some mental health issues. Dad took the kid and didn't bring them back for a few months in violation of the order. I got the kid back, then met with mom and kid and realized kid was doing way better with dad and should be with him. Tried to reason with mom. She didn't listen. Ultimately the child protection office got involved and child was placed with dad. I last saw mom many years ago and she was still not in a super healthy place and child was still with dad. So best ending happened and not because of me. So best ending happened and not because of me. It's not logical or fair to yourself to think about it that way. Maybe if you hadn't represented mom, then dad wouldn't have hired his lawyer, and CPS would have pushed them into a shared custody agreement. Then she would have put the kid in a car and drove into a lake or something. Not me, but a friend who studied law. They helped on a case where the father had shot and killed the mother of his children. The reason why he had shot her was because he was working abroad to earn as much money as he possibly could for his kids, so that they would never have the life he did as a child. He came back to find that she'd spent all the money on drugs and his kids were being abused. Those poor kids. This is my first case and I'm currently working on it now, but it feels largely morally reprehensible, and to trust case where our client has been indeed manipulating the market in shoddy ways. However, I'm not defending the client's practices, I'm merely advising him, which means I tell him in pages of legalese to cut the balls because that crap will land you big butt fines. Not a specific case, but viewing child pornography was pretty uncomfortable. As a defense attorney, you would go to the prosecutor's office to view the discovery files as they're prohibited from releasing it outside the office. So you go in and sit down in a small room and a legal secretary brings you the discs with the files on them. On one case, I had to view the files more than once. So imaging rolling in saying, "Hey, need to see that kid's dong again. Thanks." Also representing parents in juvenile where I was fighting to return kids to pretty broken homes. Most of the time it didn't bother me, but in one case I represented a dad whose baby mama had just had these adorable twins. These parents were absolute shitheads. Now a lot of times, the foster families are one small step above the parents themselves, not people I would ever hire to babysit my kids. But in this case, the foster parents were a couple of 30-somethings who I presume couldn't have kids of their own. They would show up to court with the infant twins, and they bought them new dress clothes for each court date. So cute. They wanted to adopt the kids, should the parental rights of the bio parents be terminated. So I felt pretty bad showing up trying to get the kids returned to the dad. I left that job before that case was completed, but I assume it had a happy ending. The judge was never going to return the kids to the parents, so I like to think the couple has them now. I've only worked as a legal intern, not a lawyer, and I cannot speak in specifics for obvious reasons, but I've dealt with about 8 child abuse cases at this point. I helped prosecute most of those, but played a role in the defense on a couple. I can tell you, either which way you're working the case, it's tough. Nothing is more terrifying than reading a young victim's description of being abused at the hands of a trusted family member. Legal, smart, and moral are very different terms which don't necessarily go together in legal work. Actions can definitely be all three. I think the toughest decisions are moral, legal, but not smart. The most morally challenging case is the one where a client has been wronged, but circumstances make holding someone to account too difficult or expensive to be accomplished. Telling a client you have been hurt by someone who did something illegal, but you can't do anything about it. Sorry really sucks. Disclaimer: none of the below is legal advice. Don't take legal advice from randos on the interwebs. Bringing a medical malpractice action can be really expensive. Some states require you hire a medical expert to present certain evidence. Some states cap the amount of damages you can recover. I've seen some egregious behavior shrugged off because the probably at fault party knows that most people can't afford to bring the case. Every case is a big deal to individual clients. Losing or getting a bad outcome is never fun, but telling a client that someone is going to skate because it's too expensive feels morally worse. I don't typically do family law, but I have a case where we suspected the mother had Munchausen by proxy, which if you've seen the Hulu movie Gypsy you know how messed up it is. The child was always fine with the dad, but mom would take the child to the doctor every other day. When they didn't give the answer mom wanted, she'd get a second, third, etc. opinion. Mom was oddly close to the nurses and doctors. Child had some type of cancer where child needed a colostomy bag and mom didn't clean it. It was infected so bad that child can't wear it anymore and child is getting more sick and dying. Mom, allegedly, pushed her child in the shower and it messed up their head. It's possible mom is feeding her drugs too because child puked blood from time to time. Now the child has seizures once a week from the shower incident. Mom spent $400,000 on medical bills in 1 year. Mom made a fraudulent GoFundMe and only used $200 of the thousands received on medical bills. The page has since been removed, and the case is still open until we can find more experts to testify. Holy crap, poor kid. Ugh. Well, fresh after law school, I worked on a case where the people involved were sketchy in every possible way. My role was very limited. I was just helping with some securities filings. The problem was that nothing quite added up, and when I brought the discrepancies over to my boss, she just told me to put the information in anyway. She was very friendly with the client. We saw him at our office all the goddamn time, as he'd often just drop by to chat and hang. Years later, the company folded, in a manner of speaking, and their clients, many of whom were quite vulnerable, lost hundreds of millions of dollars. I was not at all surprised. My boss was someone whom I had dreamed of reporting for years for that and other sketchiness, but she was slippery enough never to do anything wrong that didn't carry some level of plausible deniability. Additionally, I'd always felt like I had zero idea of what I was doing as a student and then first year associate there. Further still, I felt powerless against someone who had built herself quite a reputation within the legal community here, and who had been known to act vindictively toward anyone who crossed her in the past. In any case, I do think about that old file often. It's not the only one we worked on at that old firm that eventually blew up in a bad way. It's also really not great to feel like you may have helped legitimize an entirely, and to me, obviously, fraudulent operation. My experience there definitely jaded me quite a bit, even compared to other junior lawyers. When I was about to start college back in the 90s, I took a legal receptionist job in a legal defense firm in my little southern town. I would work answering the phones until 1 PM and then after that I would tag along with one of the lawyers for a few unpaid hours and watch them do their jobs in court. Everyone was very nice and did me a huge favor because the experience gave me enough information to learn that being a lawyer wasn't for me. It turns out that I can't handle watching people be crushed by the system. I could handle the murder trials, drug charges and real estate squabbling no problem. It was watching poor people get ground up over minor offenses or simple mistakes, little things that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. One particular case stood out to me. There was shooting and a crowd had gathered around the body. A detective was asking people in the crowd if they'd seen anything. Our defendant said yes when he hadn't seen anything really, but he just wanted to help. He was a simple-minded person, but never formally diagnosed with anything largely due to the lack of services in my town and the fact that he dropped out of school early. When I met him, it was clear that he was a sweet person who really liked people, but was dealing with a low IQ and some reasoning issues. The detective separated our defendant from the crowd and started questioning him. After a few minutes, it was clear that the defendant was just giving answers that he thought the detective would want to hear. He really wanted to make the detective happy. Instead of just dismissing the guy, the detective arrested him for giving false information. He had a few minor thefts on his record. Again, he had reasoning issues, so he was really looking at serious jail time because he talked to the police again. This dude just liked talking to people and didn't know better. He had no diagnosis or health records to back up any claim of mental deficiencies, and anything resembling that would cost money. He didn't have or time in a state mental facility. He lived with a relative who was equally broke. His lawyer was contemplating a guilty plea because he'd lied directly to a police officer and admitted it. I left before the case got resolved, but it's the one I still think about. This guy was largely harmless and was likely going to spend at least some time in serious jail, where the outcome would likely have been very bad for him. The thing that stuck with me was how unnecessary it all was. It was suffering for literally no purpose. Putting him in jail was not going to magically give that guy better cognitive skills other than making him distrust people. If anything, this should make you livid with that detective. They did that just to have an easy arrest. MLMs are considered pyramid schemes in my country, and both are banned in order to protect consumers. It's a crime to establish an MLM. Public prosecution here got wind of an MLM operating and shut it down, closing up the premises and everything. My firm was hired by the MLM to defend their case and establish to the public prosecution that they should be able to continue to operate. I had to prep all the defenses while absolutely despising MLMs and thinking that they're run and operated by predatory pieces of crap. We had several high-up employees from the MLM's head office in the US fly halfway across the world to us multiple times for status update meetings, lasting 15-30 minutes or so. That could have literally been done over email or conference call. Nope. They just had so much money to burn off the backs of vulnerable people who have zero chance of succeeding in their business that a gang of them would fly over every so often to ask, "So how's it going?" I thanked my lucky stars every time the public prosecution rejected one of our arguments, and eventually the MLM gave up and cleared out of the country. Never been so happy that my arguments were unsuccessful. I want to go to there. Way late, but I knew someone who worked on a morally disappointing case. Basically, a woman was sexually assaulted. It was obvious that the guy did it. The woman was clearly distraught and the guy just acted guilty. My friend said from the bottom of his heart he could just tell, like the rest of the jury. But the case was years old, on top of her waiting to press charges. In the end, the grand jury couldn't send it to court. Simply not enough evidence. It was all hearsay. The way my friend told it, the jury was extremely distraught, lost trust in the system and the likes. They just felt so disgusted, like they should send this guy to court, and they had the power to do so, but they just couldn't. A close relative was a judge in a pretty small town in the 80s. There was a case, drug deal gone bad. I guess one guy went to his dealer's trailer. Guy planned to rob dealer, not only take his drugs but his money as well. Dealer picked up on that plan quickly and pulled out a gun. First guy pulled out his gun as well. Both died. Suicide by stupidity. Really. The families ended up suing each other for wrongful death. $. Relatives spent a couple of days going over the law before they arrived in court, each wanting to get rid of the other for money. Relative, while on the bench no less, said something to the effect of they both did society a favor by removing themselves from our society. Early 80s, not a chance for that statement to go viral the way it would now, but you can bet the week following the letters to the editor in the local paper blew up. I only include this because the prosecutor was laughing so hard he had to excuse himself from the room when the judge made the comment. Not a lawyer, but a lawyer's assistant. My boss asked me to falsify the signature of a recently dead man in order to have a will validated. In my country, when a person dies, it takes up to 4 days to have the act registered, and in that time frame my boss legalized a secret will in which one of the sons of the deceased would be substantially benefited. It was of course her client. I was born and raised Catholic, married into a very prominent Catholic family. I joined a firm that was representing physical abuse victims. I initially stayed out because the bishop who was in charge of the bad priest married my wife and me, but the more I observed the case and his lying, I couldn't sit by. When the case was dismissed at the trial level, the partner asked me to write the appellate briefs because that was my forte. I did, and the dismissal was reversed and the church quickly settled. Highlight of my career and spiritual life. Jesus had the harshest condemnations for people who harm children. I defended a man accused of abusing his GF, and it was the third time he'd been charged in the same relationship. It was obvious he was guilty, but the GF essentially was under his spell and stopped cooperating. Obvious pattern of some pretty serious abuse. Defended a guy charged with child abuse. Not the challenging part. He clearly did not do it. He was, however, an admitted and convicted diddler from an earlier case. Yuck. But everyone is entitled to a defense, and this guy clearly didn't do this one. So, why challenging? He so clearly didn't do this one that as the case developed, the prosecutor realized he didn't do it, but this was in the last 2 months or so before the prosecutor's re-election. In a roundabout, didn't say it, but clearly conveyed it manner. Prosecutor communicated in effect, leave it alone until after the election and it will go away. Client was in jail and couldn't make bail. We let the case delay. Election passed and a couple of days later charges were dismissed. It sucked, but had we tried to fight it, client might well have been convicted by a jury since he had a previous conviction and he could have went away for over 10 years for something he didn't do. I worked defense before becoming a prosecutor 2 years ago. The hardest case was a guy who was accused of physically abusing his family friend's daughters, who were 5 at the time. He hired us. He didn't want to register as a diddler and didn't want to do any jail time. We knew he did it. We heard his interview with the police. Yet we had to defend him to the best of our ability. We trawled through the family friend's Facebook accounts, finding leading photos to show that the kids learned this on their own. We said they were coached by their vindictive grandmother. It felt disgusting and repugnant. It was our job, but dang, it left a bad taste in my mouth. I left and became a domestic violence and physical abuse prosecutor, which I still do. You have been spotted by the money pigeon. Comment gimme gimme and he will bless you with good fortune. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.